Okay, thank you so much, Amanda, for your informative presentation. And as our slide indicates, we have reached the part of the presentation where we would be happy to answer any of your questions, and you still can post them in the Q&A portion of the Zoom. So please go ahead and post your questions if you have any. Right now, we have a few questions. First is asking if there is any flexibility in lease considering the COVID-19 situation.
That's a really good question. And it's been a concern for a lot of students. If Generally speaking, no, but that would be something that you would have to talk to the property manager about. Um, there's nothing that's required by the law, but that doesn't mean that individual renters and individual leases can't make agreements. So maybe you could say, I'm not available till September 1st, because usually people tend to move in at the beginning of the month, but they don't have to. And so it's not a guarantee that there would be flexibility. That would have to be an individual agreement with you and the property manager.
Okay. So that would be something to consider perhaps for the students who are going to be coming for the fall 2020 semester. So that was a very good question. Thank you, Amanda, for answering it. Um, in terms of landlords, what if landlord says that the student cannot have pets? Can they do anything about that?
So it's up to the landlord whether you can have a pet or not. But that's a question that you should ask when you're looking for pets. Now, I will say this, if you have a pet and the reason that you have the pet is because of a medical condition, there is an exception to the rule for service animals or therapy animal, I should say assistance animals. So sometimes people have animals like dogs and cats to help them with medical conditions like depression or anxiety. And so in that situation, there is a different set of rules. There's usually some paperwork that you have to provide from your doctor to verify that that this is a necessary that it's necessary for you to have the animal. But the landlord in general gets to decide whether their apartment allows pets or not. So again, that would be something that you would want to ask your landlord right away.
Thank you. A different question regarding landlords' control over certain aspects of the housing. And this one is about the temperature. Whether can landlord control the temperature so it does not get too cold?
Generally speaking, you would be responsible for the heat level. The only real requirement that they have is that you not turn it below a certain amount, and that's in order to prevent the pipes from freezing. If you're having difficulty maintaining, if it is too cold in your apartment, you should contact the landlord right away. You should let us know as well, because there is a city housing inspector, and that person, if the apartment is not providing sufficient heat, the city housing inspector can also be of assistance in helping you get the heat higher. But they don't set maximums on what you can set the heat on, as long as it's reasonable. And because most people are in charge of paying their own electric bill and paying their own heating bill, it's really up to you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Another question was more about the contract timing, and somebody says that all apartments say that the contract starts on August 1st. So how long can student wait to see the apartment?
So they don't always start right on August 1st. They might start a little bit before or a little bit after that. So if you're not getting to campus right away, Or if you're getting there a little sooner, sometimes students have to stay in a hotel for a couple of days so that they can have an opportunity to look at some apartments. But usually once you look at if the apartment's available, it's usually a pretty quick turnaround process as far as looking at the apartment, signing, and being able to move in.
Perfect. Thank you. Yes, and in terms of students attending the mandatory orientation, as we were saying, it would be desirable for students to arrive at least a couple days prior to the start of the orientation so that they have a chance to adjust to the Iowa City and the university and get their bearings and adjust their jet lag. Um, so, there is a little bit of time that students can spend before the orientation. Um, and in that same line, there was a question that whether university will provide any provision for students along with their guardian to stay at the university for a couple of days so that they can attend international orientation and then they can look for accommodation off campus. I believe that this would be, if I may, Amanda,
Mhm.
um, I would say that this is typically something that student will need to determine when they can arrive to Iowa City, to United States, to Iowa and Iowa City. And as Amanda mentioned, there are options of accommodation on campus, such as the Iowa House. Do you know, Amanda, if that facility is currently closed? And
Yeah, so the Iowa House Hotel is a hotel inside the Iowa Memorial Union. I believe it is currently closed, but I expect there to be some updates as we get closer to August.
correct. And so I would like to bring that to the students' attention that if they're looking for a temporary housing options, it was already mentioned during the presentation, and we hope that that will work out for you. Um, the next question was also very specific. Would you have a recommendation for housing near or nearest location to Tippie College of Business?
Yeah, it's kind of, there are some houses in that neighborhood, and then I know there's some larger apartment complexes on Burlington Street that would only be a couple of blocks from Tippie. The other thing I was going to suggest, and I just forgot what I was going to say. It slipped out of my mind. The other thing I was going to suggest when you're looking for apartments is that the student government at the university has a report that they submit every year, and I think I can find it here in a second. But student government has a guide to Iowa City apartments, and it's an opportunity for students to rate their apartment experience, and then that would give you an idea of maybe a certain company that you would want to work with. I think, let me see if I can find it quick. Sorry about that. But there are a lot of apartments near campus and therefore near Tippie College of Business. And actually, I just found that renter's guide. I'm going to put that in the chat function. Let me see. This is, sorry about that. This is a place to look where students have rated their renting experience to help students who are new to Iowa City and new to renting.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Amanda. Um, an interesting question was also that if students are looking for some suggestions from their peers on the housing around town, is there any kind of a forum that you can recommend to them to interact with current students about the ideas on housing?
Yeah, I think my understanding is that a lot of that occurs online. on social media accounts. There's also a Reddit page, Reddit, that's specific to the University of Iowa. And I've also seen people on that forum discuss certain apartment companies or apartment locations. Sometimes when you search the companies on Google or another search engine, there's some reviews on there as well. But I think a lot of it happens on social media platforms.
Perfect, thank you. Then we had some interesting question about what are the most common red flags in the lease that students should be aware and careful about?
I think the leases have gotten better than what they were maybe 5 or 10 years ago. One of the things that I do look out for is if it seems like there's a lot of fees, like if everything comes with a fee, um, you know, uh, uh, and some fees are okay, but we sometimes get these fees that just seem kind of random, and it is like, let's say that the one I've seen before is, you're not allowed to be on the roof of the roof of the building because it's not safe. Or if you break a rule, you get fined. That's not really normal, and I would say that's the biggest red flag. Another red flag is that if the landlord is pressuring you to sign the lease without having the opportunity to read it, that would be a red flag to me. Or if the landlord doesn't want to send you a copy of the lease to look at before, or to have to, so that you can answer questions. It makes me wonder if they're trying to hide something, or why would they not want you to be able to have an opportunity to really um, read read the lease really well.
Okay, thank you so much. The next question was about if someone has not applied for their visa, and is it okay to rent, and they don't know, when they're going to be able to get their visa, and, the timing is sort of uncertain during this time. The student is asking whether it would be okay to rent an apartment currently.
It's okay to do it. It's just that there are some risks involved, right? So once you sign on the lease, and let's say the lease is supposed to start on August 1st, the company will expect you to start paying at that time. And so yes, you are allowed to do it, but it may not be a good idea until you are more sure of your plans. And I don't think I mentioned this, but I do want to say that there are a lot of apartments and rental units in Iowa City. If you go to the websites that we've talked about, you will see a lot of listings that are available starting in the late summer and early fall. So you do still have some options, and you will continue to have some options as we get closer to the school year. Because sometimes what happens is, let's say a student already goes to the university and this is going to be their second year at the university, and they sign a lease, but then they decide to move home with their parents, or they decide to go to a different university. They are looking for people to take their place in the lease they already signed. And so I don't feel like there's going to be a shortage of apartments if you decide to wait. Now, don't get me wrong, it's a lot to do once you get to Iowa City, but there's advantages and disadvantages to signing the lease now as opposed to doing it in August.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Related to that question would be another one. Is it too late to look for housing close to campus right now?
Yep. No, there's still plenty of time. I think it's a really good idea, though, to think about what buildings you plan to be at for classes, or if there's a gym you want to work out at, or those types of things, to really think about the location. Yes, a lot of the apartments have been signed on for, but I was literally just looking at I was helping a student earlier today with an apartment issue, and I know that there's a lot of 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom. If you're looking for an apartment for 8 people, that's going to be more difficult because there aren't very many. But if you're looking for 1 person or 2 people, there are still a lot of options.
Awesome. Thank you. So there was another question regarding to what you presented earlier about keeping the housing in good conditions so that students, can claim their deposit. But what if the student cleans the house to the original condition, but the landlord says that they're not satisfied with their cleaning and forfeit all of their deposit? What?
That's a really good question, and it's something that comes up quite often. And so sometimes our office does have to get involved. Sometimes we actually have to go to court and ask a judge to resolve the dispute. I'm not saying that happens a lot, but it's a possibility. And so the best way to protect yourself is to take really good pictures of what the apartment looks like. And I say apartment, but I mean rental house too. To take really, really good pictures of what the apartment looks like at the beginning and at the end. Because if we do need to have a judge, for example, resolve the dispute, it's going to be really helpful for the judge to see those pictures, because everybody's standards are a little bit different. And so we want to have a comparison of what the apartment looks like at the beginning and at the end.
Wonderful. Thank you. That was a very good question indeed. Next question was, does the student need a social security number to get an apartment?
Another good question, and no, you don't. Usually what happens is the landlord tries to come to us. The landlord usually asks for a social security number, but we have quite a few international students and faculty and staff at the university, and so they're used to having people who don't have social security numbers. So what they might want you to do is to have a cosigner, which is usually a friend or a family member who agrees to help you with your rent if you can't afford to pay it. The other thing that they could do is ask for more money up front as part of that security deposit. So the security deposit, as I said, I think I said, is that it's money that the landlord holds on to for at the beginning of the lease, and that as long as there's no problems, you get the money back at the end. So usually, or oftentimes, the security deposit is the same amount as 1 month's rent. However, for some students who don't have social security numbers, the landlord might say, okay, I need to have 2 months rent at the beginning. They can't ask for more than 2 months rent. And then, so you would have to maybe provide more money at the beginning of the lease, which you would get back at the end of the lease, provided that you've cleaned and paid your rent and obeyed the lease terms.
Thank you again. And the next question was, how can I know if an apartment is in a safe part of town?
Good question. I've lived in the Iowa City area for quite a while, and I also went to school here. And generally speaking, Iowa City and Iowa in general is a safe place. We don't have a lot of we don't have really a lot of crime compared to other areas. And I think that that's something that you might get from the reviews online and from the social media accounts that I've mentioned. Generally speaking, the student housing tends to be kind of clustered, and so those areas are generally safe. What I would suggest doing is when you tour an apartment building or you're asking a landlord, ask if, do they have do they have security cameras? Do they have lighting in the parking lot? The apartments in Iowa City are required to have deadbolt locks. So not just a key, but an actual deadbolt. And so I think that's probably where I would go to get more information. Although I can share a personal opinion. When I got my first job after school, I was moving to a new town, and my dad actually called the non-emergency phone number for the police department and asked the police about it. Obviously, that's not an emergency phone call, but I think that the asking your ISS advisor or asking your orientation advisor, you can ask us. We're happy to help. But generally speaking, Iowa City is a very safe place.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Actually, related to the location question is the next one, which is about the public transportation, whether they are good, whether the public transport system in Iowa City and area is good, and whether it's on during the weekends and holidays.
Yes, good question. So I like the public transit system. I use it to get to work, and I take the Coralville route. It's very affordable. There's also a campus bus called Cam Bus. When you get to town, you'll see them. They're yellow and black buses, and those go to the campus buildings. I know the city buses, I don't believe go on Sundays, but I'm not sure about CAN bus. They do generally go fairly late at night, at least till like 11, I would say. They are typically open on holidays, but they might have a reduced schedule. The other thing I wanted to mention is that we have something called Night Ride. And that is like, let's say that you are at the library and it's later at night and you need a ride home. There is a university service that can give you a ride home, provided that you live within a certain geographical area. And I can see if I can provide that as well, a link to that as well. But that's also that's a safe way to get home, and it's a university program. Um, and I think I just found that you'll be able, I'm going to post that in the chat function as well. And this will tell you what areas are covered by night rides. So that might be a good place to check as far, is the location of the apartment you're looking at within the range of the night ride service.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for mentioning that, Amanda. Somebody is asking whether they can just buy the renter's insurance after they have a problem with their housing. Would that work?
No, you should buy it like when you start your apartment. So you have to have insurance at the time that the incident happens in order to be covered.
All right. Let's move on to the next question. There's a easy one here. What about any suggestions for students to furnish their apartments with an inexpensive furniture?
Yeah,
Because obviously they can't bring everything with them from home from
right.
abroad.
Good question. So kind of two parts to that. First off is that there are apartments available in Iowa City that are furnished. And these tend to be the bigger apartment complexes that there's places called Quarters, Hawks Ridge, Rise, and Latitude, I believe. Those, I believe, have furnished apartments, but those can be a little more expensive. Otherwise, and I'll have someone enter it in the names into the chat function. There are some stores in Iowa City and Coralville. One is called Stuff Etc. There's Goodwill. There's the Salvation Army, and there's Crowded Closet. So I think those will be put into the chat function. But yes, there are quite a few stores. The quality of the furniture kind of varies by the time of the year. So actually, when you get here in August is probably a really good time to look for furniture, because when people move out of their apartments in July, they will donate or donate their furniture to some of these places. And then that would be a good time for someone else to pick up some stuff.
Great, and we did provide some of those names of the stores in the chat function. So thank you for mentioning that, Amanda.
Yep.
Let's move on to a couple more other questions. We are approaching the final time of our presentation today. So let's just pick a couple of the questions that we have received. One of them is, if you can say what approximately are charges for an apartment for a month in Iowa City. That's a very tricky question.
Yes, it's tricky because there's a lot of things that you have to take into consideration. Obviously, location. So the closer you are to the school buildings, the more expensive it can be. So don't be afraid to look farther from campus or look to Coralville, which is the town next to Iowa City, because you tend to get a better deal because of the location, but then you have to think about transportation. You also have to think about whether it's furnished or not, because that can also increase the price. And there are some companies in Iowa City that provide buildings that have swimming pools, gym facilities, so extra amenities. So I would think that you would probably pay at least $500 a month for an apartment. Now, if you're bringing, if you're going to have a roommate, or if you're having your spouse or significant other, that would reduce the cost. But I think I would guess maybe $500 to $700 a month for rent. But it's really hard because every unit and every company is different.
All right. And you just mentioned something that ties to the last question, or one of the last questions that we're going to answer, and whether the utilities are usually, do they come with the lease or are they typically separated?
It varies greatly. So typically what the lease will have a section that lists all of the utilities. And then there will be like a checkbox, and there'll be a column for tenant responsibility and a column for landlord responsibility. And so the lease will tell you which ones you're responsible for. I would say with the houses, you are likely to be more responsible for the utilities, but some of the apartments might include like one of the utilities. Um, I think it's pretty rare to have all of the utilities included.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. I hope that helps address that question. So there was somebody asking how they can tell that a listing is a scam.
Yeah, so that's a good question. I would check as far as companies go. I would check like that student government survey, because we know that those are legitimate companies. If the landlord doesn't want to show you pictures of the apartment or doesn't want to show you a video of the apartment, I believe there's a way you can check online where you can like submit a picture, and it will tell you whether that picture has been posted like all over the country, because obviously that wouldn't be a picture of an apartment just in Iowa City. I can't remember the name of that. I apologize. Um, but I think you could also check with the city housing inspector. And I believe those links are on our website. You could check with them to see if this is a legitimate company. But really the best thing to do would be to actually visit the apartment and see that it's vacant, and go on a tour of the apartment once you're able to get to Iowa City.
All right. And one last question. Um, so will there be any temporary accommodation if the program converts to online mode due to COVID breakout, and if I have to visit occasionally? Um, I believe that there could be an option. Amanda, do you want to mention that? The only issue would be between the lease and the temporary housing option, that student would have to decide what they want to do. And I would assume that we would provide information. The university would be providing any updates on the situation in the fall semester rather early during the summer, so that students can make plans accordingly. Do you
Yeah,
wanna, do you
I've
want to?
heard, I mean, I've been in some meetings where we've been told that we'll have a better update um, in the next week or two about what classes will be like in the fall. I know that there's a possibility that some classes will be held in person, and some classes will be held online, but we really don't have any definites yet. As far as temporary housing goes, um, typically students would stay in a hotel, or they would get something called an Airbnb, which is like a short-term rental, which usually only lasts a couple of days or for a week maybe. But that those things aren't provided by the university. Those are on an individual basis.
Correct, and I agree with that. That would be something that students would need to then determine on their own. Okay, I believe that we have exhausted most of the questions that we have received. And so I am going to be posting a link to our brief webinar survey. There are only a handful of questions, and we would appreciate your feedback on today's webinar and our presentation. We always look into improving our either content or covering any issues that you consider not have been covered, and it helps our presenter to prepare for the future webinars as well. And then we have also a couple of updates or reminders. Next slide, please. The reminders are basically about the email address and email contact for our orientation team, who will be happy to address any questions that you may have about pre-arrival checklist or any other issues related to your arrival to United States, to the University of Iowa. And so again, it's isss-orientation@uiowa.edu. And then the other resource that I would like to bring to your attention again is designed specifically for new international students, and that is ISS's website for new students, which is international.uiowa.edu/new-students. And this is finally a invitation to the remaining webinars that we still have scheduled. There are a couple of webinars that are specifically geared towards undergraduate students, but there are going to be still a couple of other webinars for our graduate students as well that may be of interest, and they're going to be covering health insurance and university billing, as well as international student employment. So we look forward to having you join us for one of these webinars in the future. And thank you again for presentation to Amanda, and then also to everyone else for participating in today's webinar. Thank you, and have a good rest of the day or evening.